Good afternoon, evening, whatever part of the world you are in. Welcome to the On the Cube Leadership Podcast. Trump has been arrested. No, indicted. No, he's out. No, he's in. What's happening? We're going to discuss that a little bit today, along with talking about another person that's out, that's in. No, he's out, but in Andrew Tate. Yes, there is lots of people in, out of court, and out of jail. We're discussing that along with things with the NHL, and we're going to be discussing a little bit of Easter and what's happening in a very special part of the world where Dr. Rod is and where my heart is as well. So, as I mentioned, Dr. Rod, welcome yet again to another podcast.
It's great to be with you yet again.
Awesome. Hey, look, we get together every week and we discuss things that are happening in the news. And look, we are just quiet observers. Let's just say that. We're not experts in any of these topics. We just look at these stories and just really want to be able to draw from these lessons that we can learn as leaders, especially us as Christian leaders, and how we can maybe learn from other people's successes and failures, and how we can actually be better at leadership. So let's get into it. Let's talk about Trump. So Trump today had his arraignment hearing. He pled not guilty to not one, not two, not three, but 34 felony charges. That's right, felony charges. Now, there was a lot of technicality around it, and there's a lot of actual great commentators that have actually done some really good research on this. Actually, what we mentioned him last week, I mentioned him again last week, was it a couple of weeks ago? Stephen Crowder. Let me encourage you, go and check out his coverage. He's very big on the facts and shows you where what all the facts are and everything about that. So I think he did a really good job of covering this. But we want to kind of approach this from a leadership perspective, not really talk about it itself, because we're not lawyers. We don't know really what's going on. And I mean, we even tried to watch Trump's announcement, or what his I suppose response, and I couldn't even get it. Unfortunately, Rumble had crashed. Poor Rumble. They're a great conservative. Actually, a non. They call themselves a non-biased platform, and they're really making some grounds now, which is great. But unfortunately, their servers couldn't handle the Trump influence, I suppose you could say. But I suppose let's take a look back. Today's theme, I really want to talk about leaders standing united, because I believe that God has called us to be united. God has called us to link arms with each other. You know, iron sharpens iron. We are better together. We aren't created to be silos. We are created to do life together. You know, looking at the discipleship model, we're better together. You know, so everything's united. So I really kind of want to theme today around how the power of leaders that stand united. Before we get into that, Dr. Rod, though, do you want to share maybe a little bit of your take on, before we get into like that leadership aspect, a little bit of your take on this whole thing with Trump and the arraignment? I know we spoke about it a few weeks ago, but you know, more has come to light now, and this 34 felony charges for an accounting entry. What's your take on all this?
Well, I did actually read the 34 charges, and they are, to say the least, quite unusual. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but my goodness me, the whole thing rests on a fairly novel, technical way of interpreting the law. And I guess it remains to be seen how the legal experts actually tackle that. But it does seem, at the very least, to be novel. And obviously, it's been motivated by political considerations. I think that is very, very plain.
Yep.
And it's a unique feature of the American system, of course, where so many law officers are actually elected.
Yeah.
And
look, Dr. Ross, it seems like both you and I have frogs in our throat tonight.
Yeah, I suddenly developed a frog. Don't know how that happened, but maybe nobody wants us to talk about this issue. It'll be very interesting to see how things actually pan out. I understand that President Trump's lawyers have sought to move the actual hearing to Staten Island out of New York City itself, obviously on the grounds that it's very unlikely that it would be possible to choose 12 unbiased jurors from within New York City. I mean, I think it's going to be very difficult for any president to get a fair trial, because they're so publicly known, and most people are going to have an opinion about them. So that's one difficulty in any case. But
especially such a polarizing one like
absolutely,
President Trump.
Absolutely. Look, my own view, I don't like much of his style, of course, but he did a lot of pretty good work when he was president. That's undeniable, and most of his critics will actually recognise that as well. Of course, his big crime was that he was a president who was not elected from the political elite. That's really, I think, what sparked all this off. And he probably cut a few corners. There's no doubt about that.
Just a few.
And and look, many of us wouldn't support him on many of the shall we say his slip ups morally, but that's not what is at issue here. And of course, he hasn't been charged in connection with any moral failings. But what he's been charged with, effectively what they are trying to do is argue that there were accounting practices within his many business organizations that could be interpreted as deliberately trying to get around federal laws concerning the election. That's what the case amounts to. It's convoluted.
And apparently they're all like there's a confusing thing of like their state laws, but because their state, like the laws that were broken were state-based laws, but
that's correct.
Because it was aligned with a campaign, that then makes it, rather than just being a petty crime, is it? No, whatever it is, it's now a felony.
They call it a misdemeanor.
A misdemeanor, that's
if you like, the minor things that you can't go to jail for, essentially, misdemeanors. But it's been elevated to a felony. And so what they're trying to do, the overall allegation, of course, is that the way in which these payments were accounted for actually amounted to trying to hide election funding from the authorities. It's a fairly long bow to draw. There's no doubt about that. And by the way, the $130,000 in hush money that was paid has been ordered to be repaid because the person to whom it was paid didn't stand by their agreement.
Yes.
That's one of the ironies. One of the little things going on the side here. There was another court case. And so it's a weird situation. But I do fear for America. I think that, look, I understand that the Republic was based, the idea of the Republic with so many positions elected, it's this idea of pushing representative democracy as deep down through the administrative mechanisms in society as possible. It's a really laudable goal. And it was actually based on the advice that Jethro gave to Moses about appointing people you can trust, people of good standing, to administer certain numbers of people, so tens and 50s and hundreds and so on. So the general principle behind it is a good, strong biblical principle. But of course, it actually depends upon people of goodwill being appointed through electoral processes to those positions. And of course, we know that this particular district attorney was, or part of his platform during his own election process was that he was going to get the former president of the United States. I think that's a very sad thing because it was to make this going after Donald Trump a political issue, I
Mm.
think is wrong, and
Yep.
it really, I think it undermines the whole Republic experiment. And
Yep.
as other commentators have said, watch out, Biden family, watch out, Clinton family, and
Well, yeah,
there will be a few others as well. So
yeah,
there
that's
will
obviously
be,
the
yeah,
challenge is the fact that, you know, there's been all this stuff about Hunter Biden's laptop and him snorting cottage cheese off of, you know, like what, you know, all of his very illegal and public that he recorded, you know, like illegal activity. He gets away with it, and yet, and Hillary Clinton got away with accidentally deleting a whole bunch of files. Oh, that was an accounting, that was a admin error, you know, and all this stuff. And then Trump does an accounting error, and then all of a sudden it's a dragged over the coals and this whole thing. But let's get into the leadership side of it. So how can we, like, that's it. It's always good to understand a little bit about, and obviously we don't know everything. It's all kind of like hearsay and kind of all what's being reported at this stage. And, you know, he pleaded not guilty to it. And so you mentioned earlier about, you know, like he got great results, but like I don't agree with everything he does, and this is just like an issue, but like it's not a moral issue, and it's not. How do we as leaders on this theme of standing united? I started this off by saying we are better together. You know, I hate it. Actually, we see it even on our videos. You know, we don't get that many views. Not yet. Maybe, hopefully, maybe you can help us get more views by sharing and liking and subscribing and doing all that awesome stuff. But even in our comments of us just, you know, looking at situations and then talking about it from a leadership perspective of what we know, the amount of hate that we get in comments, and people that are like Christians that are attacking us because of one word that we said or something like that, you know, like stop, like we shouldn't be fighting. We should stand united, right? How do we stand united with someone? And I don't mean supporting Trump, because I know people are going to be like, oh, are we, how do we vote for Trump? Or no, I'm not talking about that. We all know in our life, like our senior pastor might be operating and like getting good results, but kind of doing some things that aren't quite, you know, maybe won't be sleeping and paying off porn stars. But I mean, we have heard those sorts of stories from churches, unfortunately. But how do we still stand united when it's not quite so good? I don't know how to say that, because, you know, like when Trump, his practices aren't all that great. He you know, like he's polarizing. He gets great results, but like, is he like, then he has all these sexual assault claims against him and all this sort of stuff, and paying off a porn star and all that, like all that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, really? But then he's the most popular. Evangelicals love him in America. And I had someone ask me at the gym today, like, they love him. Like, how do you, with all that stuff, how do you still support him? What advice have you got for people that are leaders, that maybe their senior leader, someone above them, isn't quite, let's say, up to standard? Like, how do we stay united?
First principles. Always go to first principles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, look, you can't excuse immoral behaviour in the church. If you're talking about senior church leaders, you can't excuse that, and they cannot remain in a senior leadership position. But it's always got to be argued, I think, on first principles. And for us, of course, the Bible, the Word of God, is the final arbiter on all matters concerning Christian belief and practice, if you like, both our theory and our practice. And so we need to form an opinion based on first principles that we derive directly from the Word of God. Now, somebody like President Trump could never or should never hold a leadership position in a church, right? Although, look, to be fair, there hasn't been very much proven in a court of law. There have been lots of allegations, and but also, I mean, there are comments that he's made that are publicly available that I think would make him ineligible for a leadership role in a church.
Yeah.
In the case of his arrest and so on, for me, the first principle is this: regardless of who is involved, we're actually seeing the legal system being used as a political weapon, and that is a bad thing. That is a bad thing. So regardless,
so that's the thing. Like, how do you stand united with someone that? Let's say Trump is guilty as sin, right? Let's say that he's done all of these things and more, and it all comes out, and like how do you stand with someone that, I mean, even if he has done these things, the approach has been wrong. He has been wronged legally. Like it's unjust the way that he's been attacked and everything like that.
well, let's sort
How
it
do you
out
still stand with
politically.
someone
It's
like
a
that?
political issue. They want to sort out a political issue, sort it out at the ballot box. That's where you sort out political issues.
Okay.
You don't decide we're going to make it impossible for somebody to run. Now, I don't know whether, look, we must assume we're not dealing with stupid people. There's a strategy here. There's a well-planned strategy.
Yeah.
So we're not dealing with people who have lost their marbles or anything like that. So there is a strategy there.
I mean,
Ultimately, I think there
Joe
is.
Biden.
They're not silly people. They're not, just because somebody's a Democrat doesn't make them stupid or senile.
No.
And by the way, I mean, I don't buy all this stuff that Joe Biden is senile. I know a lot of commentators. I don't think he is. I think he's a whole lot smarter than we give him credit for.
Yeah,
he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And he's being advised by people, and he goes along with that advice. But one of the things I think they've decided to do is, one, they don't like the fact that somebody was elected president of the United States and they weren't from the political elite on either side, right? So if a different person from the Republican Party had been elected, we wouldn't have had all of this hoo-ha. The biggest issue politically is that he wasn't from the right tribe. On either side. That's my view, and from down under here in Australia. And so that the biggest crime he ever committed was that he was a jolly businessman who decided he'd take a tilt at becoming president, and that's really what people have got against him. But you know, when you say, you know, we're united we stand, I think what we unite around is principle, not necessarily an individual. So I don't see a lot of purpose in uniting around President Trump, but I do see a lot of purpose in uniting around the principle that it is wrong to use the legal process as a political bludgeon. The right place to deal with political issues is at the ballot box, and that's what should happen.
That's really good. And like bringing this back into, I feel bad, you know, just referring to the church about this, but it's kind of like the most common story we hear is people suffering under poor leadership in a local church, and it's usually those leaders are actually great leaders. They really are. They just have some faults, that what we call poor leadership. It's the behavior, it's not the person. And I think that, like, with what you're saying, to like interpret it back into those, is we all have those experiences, whether it's in a church or in a business or whatever, that the leader may not be doing things exactly how we expect or we like or whatever. But if we're driving towards that same principle with what you're saying, is like, we want to provide a better service in this particular industry to our customers, you can unite on that. In the church, is like, we're wanting to, I mean, even just the most basic one, we're just wanting to bring Jesus to our local area. You can unite around that, but usually most local churches most pastors have a vision that's a little bit more succinct than that and a little bit bigger. And I'm sure we can unite it. Like, Dr. Rod is my pastor, even though we're on opposite sides of the planet. And I mean, he pastors me better than probably I think that most people are pastored in this world. I'm blessed to have him as my pastor. But it's because we actually stand united on business. You are the business pastor. You understand how important it is for business in the kingdom, plus also how important business is in the community. And you and I are united on that. We may not agree on everything, but we can stand united on that principle. And so I actually love that, Dr. Rod. So as a bit of a lesson, if you feel challenged by the person who is leading you and you're in a leadership around and maybe you don't see eye to eye on everything, like Dr. Rod said, find a key principle. Find the principle that you guys are driving for, that you can stand united on that principle, because then we can stand together and stand united, and we are stronger together.
But of course, the other thing that we need to keep in mind is, as leaders, we should always be doing the best we can to discover what our own negatives are and work on them, because there's no excuse for
100%.
poor leadership either, and
No.
poor leadership damages people, and ultimately it will impinge upon our capacity to actually fulfill our vision. So while it is important for us to unite around the vision, the ideas, and obviously as Christians we're all united around Jesus Christ, the central figure in our faith, that can never be used as an excuse for poor leadership. Never.
Yes.
And as leaders, our attitude should be, I am going to grow, I'm going to receive feedback, and I'm going to ask for input, and I'm going to allow the Holy Spirit and wise people to lead me to become a much better leader. So regardless of what anybody might say about the power of unity, there is never an excuse for poor leadership.
Yeah, you're right. And so I kind of want to jump further onto that, because you kind of opened up this can of worms with that. Is I actually feel like I'm thinking of all those people that have been in leadership positions that they don't agree with what their senior leader is actually doing or how they're approaching certain things. And unfortunately, sometimes a leader that is displaying poor leadership doesn't always listen to feedback. And I wonder whether they would be more open to it. I know that it's bigger than this, and there's so many very reasons why they don't listen. But I wonder if a leader knew that you were truly standing united, and you both had that principle, that you were both, yes, we stand united on this principle. If you had that, I wonder if they'd be more open to hearing your feedback. Not in every case, but I just wonder, because I've seen a lot of people giving that feedback, and it comes from a place of, subtly, I want your position. Subtly, I think I can do this better than you, so I'm giving you this feedback because I want your position, rather than, and then there's a little bit of defensiveness that comes out of it and stuff like that. I just wonder, as you were sharing that, I just thought, if we are standing united with someone, I'm sure if we're genuinely united with that person, I'm sure that they would be more open to that feedback that you're talking about.
Well, that raises another issue, and it's something we should talk about in one of our podcasts, and that is followership matters as well.
Yeah.
And look, I did a rough search of a catalogue of a Christian bookshop not too far from where I live. There was something like 400 titles on leadership and 2 titles on followership. Wow. Although it's probably not a good word to use anyway when you're searching. But we don't really teach much for 2IC, people who are in a 2IC position, and we certainly don't teach very much at all about what constitutes good followership.
Yeah.
And I do think one of the things we need to do as we move in this podcast and as people teach leadership in general is to start thinking more about what constitutes good followership and how do we support leaders who are not right at the top, but who are essentially in that senior level where they might be the 2IC or the 3IC even. There's not a lot of support for these people. But as I say, that really gets us into a different area for discussion. But I think it is something that we ought to address one day because it's important and it's neglected.
You know what? Actually, let's go for it. Because I think it goes with our theme today about talking about standing united. Because standing united is standing united with the person that is leading us, that we are usually, I would say there would definitely be more leaders that are under a leader than there are leaders that aren't under someone. I would hazard a guess. And I would hazard a guess that what I find is actually the 2ICs and those below, the leaders below, that are actually more hungry to learn about becoming a better leader rather than the person right at the top. Unfortunately, not in every case. So what would you say is the secret to that followership? You're being a good 2IC.
Well, I don't know whether I know too many secrets, but one thing for certain is that we need to understand that leadership is not a position.
Yes.
It's more a behavior, a set of attitudes and attributes and so on.
I love it.
Now, some people's leadership arises primarily because of their position, and there's actually a name for that. It's called positional leadership. But leadership, given that leadership is about influence and about empowerment, leadership can actually happen at various levels within an organization. Now, I know we tend to equate leadership with being the top dog in the management hierarchy, but I just don't think that's a good way to characterize it. Leadership can happen anywhere within an organization because of the way in which we define it. We define leadership on the basis of our capacity to influence others and the degree to which we're able to empower those around us.
Yeah, and I believe that leadership is so much bigger. It's within our friends, within our friends groups. It's in your family. It's out in the community. It's not. I see leadership as the behavior, as how we are acting to pretty much just helping those around us be better versions of themselves. Really.
Well, yes, it is. It is, and look. In terms of influence and empowerment, of course, there are a few other pretty important things like vision, authenticity, integrity. Those three, I think, are significant. And the other one for Christian organizations is I think you need somebody who's a fairly deep theological thinker.
Yeah, that's good.
Now, that doesn't mean they speak theologically, but what it does mean is they search the scriptures on all of the matters that they are making decisions on, and they seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit. They really seek to discover the theological underpinnings of the decisions they are making. So if it's in relation to a decision about the people in your organization, what does the Bible have to say about how we deal with people type issues? And I think the Bible's got a lot to say, particularly as we tease out what it means to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. I think that has a lot of implications for the whole human resources management process. For example, I think our understanding of prayer and meditation and receiving wisdom from the Lord should lead us to consider within our organizations as we feasibly can when we're making big decisions, because somebody who might be way down in the hierarchy might also be somebody who's absolutely committed to pray. And if you don't provide opportunities and mechanisms to kind of harvest their own ideas and their own wisdom and revelations and prophecy and so on, you could miss out on a lot. So, God is not just going to speak to the senior person in an
No.
organisation. And I'd have to say, I feel quite uncomfortable about the model that says, well, I'm the senior pastor, I get the vision at the beginning every year, and your job is to get in behind it and to support it.
Yeah.
I've got some doubt about it, because we're all human beings
hmm
and we don't all get it right. And I'll really, and look, there are not many pastors who actually really live by that model, because they
Yeah.
do seek a lot of input from their
Yes.
leadership team. So I am
Yeah.
creating a bit of a straw person here.
Yes.
I have no doubt. But my point is that the kind of out front hero leader is really only appropriate in the context of war or corporate crisis.
Yeah.
Right, you need
That's good.
your sort of strong militaristic type leader at times. So when your church is going through a significant crisis, when your organisation is going through a significant crisis, that's when your leadership has to be much more kind of militarily oriented. But generally speaking, I think we need to be as consultative as we possibly can. We need to push decision making as far down through the organisation as we possibly can. And we need to recognise that the Holy Spirit is going to speak to people everywhere. And I think that's something really, really important for us to keep in mind.
Sorry, Dr. Rob, my camera just dropped for a moment there. Some technical challenges, but I'm back. So yeah, look, I actually, when we talk about followership, I actually see it as servanthood, right? And I actually like, which is actually kind of contradictory to what most people say or have with it's not okay. Yeah. Thank you, Yash, speaking to me in the background. Let me there we go. Thank you, Yash. That should come through now. Yes, thank you. Technical challenges. So I have so many systems running there, but
yeah, well,
Joyce,
I can't see anything now, so we'll just see how we go, shall we?
can you can see me though, can't you, Dr. Rod?
No,
Yash,
I've just got two great big white screens in front of me.
It's working, Yash. Yeah, great, awesome. Okay,
It's good, just as long as you know I can't see anything, but that's fine. I can still talk.
we can still talk.
I can still talk.
so let me the servanthood, which is kind of a bit of a contradiction to leadership, because people think that, well, you have your servants and then you have the leader. Well, actually, no, leaders are actually called to serve. That's what Jesus actually said, right? Like that's what I came to serve, not to be served. I came to serve. And I kind of feel like we kind of forget that we as like the followership is, we are there to serve still, like in whatever position we are, whether we're right at the top or the second in charge or third in charge or right the way down the bottom, we're always called to serve. And so I think that that's one of the keys, is understanding that we are there to serve our leader. That's what makes a good follower. We're there to serve, but we're also there to serve the people under us as well, and understand that is as important as a position as being at quote unquote the top, right? And so I kind of, there's a couple of things I would say to that followership is, number one is, I think we need to have a servant heart. And to be a good leader, we need to be anyway. And I think that that's where I see a lot of poor leadership, your behavior coming from, is where people slip out of that I'm here to serve people, and they flip the coin and they expect people to serve them. And so I think that that's a challenge. The advantage of the other thing is looking at the disciples, right? And and looking at, well, they were really, I mean, look which ones were really good followers. Look which ones actually went and made a major impact. And look at Peter, right? Like, what was Peter like? Now, he had his faults, but he was passionate, serving Christ. I'm going to be there to the end. I'll chop someone's ear off. I'll go wherever you go. He was there. He made mistakes, and yes, he denied Christ at times, and he had some faults. However, he served passionately, and I think that's kind of a key that I would say to someone to make followership good. Now, one last thing I'll add to this: purpose. I know, Dr. Rod, it always comes back to purpose, right? With me, I mean, it's all about purpose. I truly, truly believe that purpose is the key. And not all of us are called to be at the top. I mean, very few of us are actually called to be at the top, because purpose is actually, I mean, we couldn't, if we were all called to be at the top, we'd all be standing alone, right? And it would be very lonely, and there'd be a lot of individuality in this world. But God called us. I mean, Paul writes, we are one body, but many parts, and Christ is the head of that body. And so we all have our part to play. And I think that if we can find our purpose within the part that we have to play, then that's what we can then flow on with and be that better followership that you were talking about. Understanding that I don't need to be in a higher position to do a better job for Christ. No, my job is to do what God has called me in the position that I'm in to serve there. I know I went on a bit of a rant there, Dr. Rod, and I don't know whether you can still see me or not, but are you just sitting there quietly because...
No, I can see you. I can see you. Don't worry.
Great.
It's all, everything's good. There's a fair bit of flickering going on, but I can still see you. And look, I agree with what you're saying.
Are you still seeing
purpose.
Flickering? Sorry. Go ahead, Dr. Rod.
No, that's okay. I certainly agree with you in respect of purpose. And
Yep.
I think it's incumbent upon us to do the very best we can to figure out what God's purpose is for us.
Yep.
And often people who are in positions well below the top position, they're still being groomed by God, or maybe even by that organization, for more senior positions of leadership. And, I often say I had a 38-year apprenticeship before I actually got into my most significant leadership role. So it can sometimes take a significant period of time. And we simply need to understand that leadership or our preparation can take a considerable time. And our purpose is the important thing. And honestly, if we know our purpose, we don't necessarily then have that desire to climb to the very top. And what we need to keep in mind is God saying to us, well done, good and faithful servant.
I love
stuck
that.
to your purpose.
Yeah, I love that. You're absolutely right, because I think that if we're chasing importance out of a title, like we're always going to be chasing a title, because there's always a bigger, better title, right? But if we're pursuing purpose and we see our identity in our purpose, that's where there's fulfillment. That's where there's a sense of peace, even when things aren't going well. Even like with me, I have my challenging days, and there's stuff that doesn't go right, like trying to do a live podcast and videos not working and stuff like that. It happens, and so if I got caught up in, if this, I have to be leading this the best, and this has to be the best podcast and all that, like I'd be crushed emotionally. But right now, I know our purpose is just to share some ideas that we feel like God has given us, some wisdom that we have around some experiences, and hopefully some people will be able to learn from it. Like, I know that purpose. Going back to what you originally said of like, we stand united by a principle, stand united by a principle. So, Dr. Rod, thank you. That was a very enjoyable detour, and I think very, very apt for what we were talking about today. So there's an extra one for you to edit today, this week, Yash. Okay, let's go on to the next topic that we're talking about is Andrew Tate. We mentioned we were going to talk about Andrew Tate. He's going from one controversial, polarizing character that is in court, etc., to another polarizing character that is in court. We've spoken about Andrew Tate before. Andrew Tate and his brother, they rose to social media stardom. They're influencers that very strong on the, let's say, teaching men to be men. Yeah, maybe a little bit too masculine. They say toxic masculinity, but if you haven't heard about Andrew Tate, you probably haven't been on the internet in the last, probably 6 months. But they were arrested for human trafficking, rape, forming an organized criminal group, and all that. Like, they were arrested on allegations of that 90 odd days, 100 odd days ago, and they were kept in custody in Romania, or kept in jail. Apparently they were in a cell by themselves for 96 days, I think it was. They've been released under house arrest, but I think the reason why I really want to talk about this is talking about standing united. These are two brothers that have gone through absolute, I mean, it's scary. They're American. I think they're American, but they live in Romania, caught up in a criminal justice system that seems to be, let's say, not above board with everything that they do or whatever, but they've been put in jail for 3 months and pretty much nothing, no contact with the outside world. Obviously, they're talking with their lawyers and things like that, but pretty much in isolation most of the day. And they've come out with even, it seems like even more resolve, more determination, that they haven't been broken. It seems like that they've come out like even with even more purpose. It's obvious that they've had to stand united. He mentioned that recently he converted to Islam, and he talks about how his prayer and staying close with God during that time and reading his Bible and all those sorts of things helped. But he and his brother standing together in a really bad time, obviously that was beneficial for them to stand united together rather than falling apart and everything like that. Dr. Rod, what advice would you have for, let's say, to someone like Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate, his brother, that are going through this trial, this struggle? And once again, like, we're not judging on whether it's true or not. Who knows what the allegations are and what's happened. But how would you advise someone? How would you stand united with someone that's going through a trial that is almost this bad? If not, some people might be going through something worse.
It's always difficult to give advice partway through something. Because if they'd asked me advice right at the start, I would have said, you need to think fairly carefully about setting up shop in Romania. Yes. Right? Because you can't make the same assumptions that you might make about any kind of system, be it social system, economic system, judicial system, etc.
Yeah.
You just have to be very careful that you don't take wrong assumptions with you when you make the move. Now, they haven't been there all that long, of course. I don't know whether this will answer your question directly at all, because I'm not sure that I can, but I would have to say I was very impressed by the statement that Andrew Tate made upon his release from prison, because there was nothing negative in it.
Yes.
And he affirmed the system. He affirmed his belief in the system. He affirmed his belief that when he went through all of the processes, he and his brother would be found innocent of the charges that have been made. And again, I'm not making any judgment on whether any of the charges were justified or not, because I don't follow the Tate brothers. I don't really know much about their circumstances. But I did actually hear the statement that he made upon release. And it was, if you like, a statesman-like thing to say. It was a very mature thing to say, because he could have chosen a different path altogether. And, I would have to say, I've never been too impressed by what I've seen of him on social media. I came to the conclusion long ago I wouldn't want him to become a role model for my own grandchildren. I don't have any male grandchildren, but in any case, but I was very impressed by what he had to say. And whether or not there's been some changes in him during this period, I just don't know. But he wouldn't come to me for advice. He'd have no reason to come to me for advice. But if he came to me right now, I would just say, mate, in public, keep going the way you did upon your release, because I thought he did show true leadership in the statement that he made. And obviously he's going to fight his case, and so he should.
Yeah.
It may be that ultimately the cases will be dropped in any case. But, look, I think that, that there needs to be a lot of wisdom. And if you've got a desire to become a so-called influencer through social media, just do it with a lot of wisdom. And just be aware that if you do become an influencer, then you will actually be under the public gaze 24/7. And that's all there is to it. You'll be like royalty. So take that into consideration.
Yeah, it's two sides of the same sword, isn't it? Really, two sides of the same knife, sword.
We say two sides of the same coin.
Coin.
Yeah.
Where did I get that knife thing from? Anyway, yes, that's the thing. Like there are. It's the same thing. If you want to become an influencer, if you want to become a leader, right? If you want to become a leader, like there's expectations, there's responsibilities that come with that as well. It's not just the fame, the influence, the benefits, or whatever, the control, or whatever it is you think it is. There is also a big responsibility, and also there is a scrutinization that happens where you are now in the public eye, whether you're an influencer, social media influencer, or just an influencer of people. Everyone will be analyzing you. Everyone will be analyzing everything under a microscope of everything you do. So we need.
That's right.
We need to be careful.
That's right. I used the term authenticity in our earlier discussion on leadership, and authenticity is all about consistency. It's about being consistent all the time. And if you're an influencer, then you're going to have to make sure that you behave consistently. So you can't really have, as it were, an on-stage persona and then a different one off stage, because as far as the world is concerned, you're on stage all the time. 100%. And authenticity is all about living consistently, both on the stage that you create and off that stage as well.
I think that the advice I would give to someone else who is going through a trial, maybe it's not of this standard and being locked up by yourself for 90 odd days, but we all go through trials, and while we're in the middle of them, we do feel like it's the worst trial in the world. Like, let's be honest. Make sure you're not standing alone. We're talking about standing united. I kind of feel like the reason why, obviously, the Tate brothers have a unique personality and a unique confidence. That's what kind of has thrust them into this stardom that they've got, this celebrity that they've got, because they do have a resolve that the average person doesn't have. So I'm not taking that away from them, but I believe that part of the reason why they were able to withstand this is because they were together. They had someone there with them. So if you're going through a trial, who's standing with you? Because we're talking about standing united. Who's standing united with you right now? You can't be a silo. And I mentioned this earlier, is I feel like way too many leaders. I mean, I remember I had this revelation when we were planning the church campus back where we met, Dr. Rob, or many years before that. But I remember I had this revelation that in my leadership position, I'm lonely. Yes, I have my senior pastor who I'm looking up to, and he's mentoring me and stuff like that. And yes, I have all these people that I'm leading, and they were great friends and everything like that. But I realized that I was in this void of, yes, there's this mentor above me, but I kind of, let's say, I don't lie, but I do kind of shade what I say because I want to impress my mentor, right? So I kind of want to impress this person who's opening up doors for me, doing things for me. So I want to put on my best face for him. And then the people that I'm leading, I realize, like, yeah, they're close friends, but there's still this distance that I still have to represent something to them. And so it's not about being fake. It's just choosing who you talk to about certain things. And I realize I'm not opening up to anyone. There's no one that I'm actually like standing with, if that makes sense. And I probably never shared this with you, Doctor, but I remember that when I came to live with you during that season, you were that person for me. And I think that's why our relationship has stayed so strong going throughout, because you did stand united with me and we were able to talk. There was no facade. There was no, it was real. I mean, I lived with you. Like, we saw each other 24/7. You saw everything about me, So I think that if you're a leader and you're going through trials, who's standing united with you? You have to find someone to stand united with, and don't do it without God. Don't do it without God. Like, if you're going through a trial, you better get down on your hands and knees and open up the Bible and spend time in worship, and because you got to stand united with him. Do you have anything more to add to that, Dr. Rod?
Yes. When you're in the middle of a trial, it can sometimes be pretty difficult to pray and to read the Bible. And I know that from my own experience as a pastor, that when I'm talking with people who are in pretty tough circumstances, they've prayed their hearts out, they've searched the scriptures and so on, they can find it very, very hard to continue to pray. And I'll often say to people, I know this is so easy for me to say, and it really is. See, words don't cost you very much. But a pastor, for example, can say, look, I'm going to commit to intercede for you, to stand in the gap. And it's, and then you've got to do it. That's both integrity and authenticity, of course. But it's tough. It's so easy, and it's easy for us here on this podcast to dispense advice and wisdom when you're in the middle of a deep crisis in your business, in your personal life. I know it can be hard to pray. I'll tell you one of the keys, though, and that is to be honest with God.
Yes.
And I can remember years ago when I was in a pretty difficult place, I had a little Bible. I've still got it. It was one of those little pocket Bibles. And I can remember going into my study early in the morning, and in desperation, I just hold this Bible up and say, God, your word tells me I should
Mm.
be experiencing something different.
Yeah.
And I suppose you could say I was complaining to God
Uh-huh.
that what I was experiencing was just so inconsistent with what I believed his word was telling me. And
Yeah.
eventually there was breakthrough. There was
Yeah.
breakthrough. And I've had countless testimonies from many, many people about breakthrough. But
Mm.
sometimes it's what I call the waiting period. And I'm waiting for some things. I'm waiting for healing in certain areas, for example. There's a few other things I'm waiting for in relation to the church. That period of waiting can be very, very hard. And as
Yeah.
you've said, Craig, don't do it on your own. The best advice
Mm.
I can give is don't do it on your own. Do you
Yeah.
have some people around you whom you can trust to do it with you? And as you say, it won't always be people from even within your own organisation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes it will be, but it won't always be people within your own organisation. So these are people who are basically willing to walk life with you, and you need one or two of them. It's very, very important.
And if you want if you're in business and you want a pastor to walk you through, check out Dr. Rod. The business pastor, an incredible pastor that has walked me through. I think that, talking about how do we get through these times, Dr. Rod talked about how to pray. Just be real. That's what I've done. That's the advice you've given me during the seasons is just be real. I mean, God knows what's in your heart anyway. He knows your thoughts. Just speak it out. Sometimes it helps just to get it out. They talk about therapy. Therapy, sometimes it's just good because you just needed to get it out. God is the best therapist, right? Just talk it out with him. Talking about then reading scriptures, because it is very difficult to read the Bible when you're going through trials. Like it is hard because you're so wrapped up in what you're worrying about, whatever it is you're going through and all the trials that come with that and the challenges, that it is difficult to sit down and then read the Bible. However, let me encourage you, get into Psalms. Like there's they call them the Psalms of Lament, right? If you're going through a trial, it's a good place to start, because you read a Psalm of Lament and it's David complaining a little bit to God, or sharing his real thoughts, and you can connect with that. It's actually much easier to read that when you're going through that. You're like, yeah, that's kind of how I feel and everything like that. But the great thing about the Psalms of Lament is they start about that, the complaining of the, just really just keeping it real, right? You just like, God, this is what's going on. But they don't stop there. That's the amazing thing about this is what's gone wrong. This is tough. But you, oh God, you're great, Lord, and this is who you are, and this is why I have faith in you, and you've always looked after me in the past, and you've always. So it actually, just reading that actually helps you go through that emotional journey yourself as well. So pray, be real to God. And if you want to get into the Bible but struggling, just open up Psalms and just go through Psalms of Lament. And there's a lot of them. Actually, if you correct me if I'm wrong, are they the most common Psalm, I think, in Psalms?
Well, I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. I
I
think
say that because I remember that at doing my master's, and
there's plenty of
one of my
lament. There's plenty of
theology.
praise as well.
Yeah. So
And then, of course, you've got the imprecatory psalms.
yeah.
You can get stuck into them too if you want. But you just got to remember that I think Jesus said, no, we don't do that these days. We pray and we forgive our enemies, and we don't call down fire from heaven.
Yes, exactly.
But I look, I think you be real with God. Tell him how you feel. I mean, he knows anyway, but it's good. It's good for you to do that. But I also think that it is important that we do give God thanks, and that we praise him. And if you've got nothing good to be grateful for in your own life, at least praise him for being the one true God who upholds everything in the universe. Because, literally, if God should withdraw his breath, then everything would simply cease to be.
Yeah.
And this is the God who wants personal relationship with each one of us, who does count the hairs on our head, although it isn't going to take him long in my case. But seriously, it when you're going through a really tough period, and the other thing too is prepare for it by being diligent in your Bible study and by building a relationship with God. Like most people become their most intense spiritually when they're going through a tough time. Well, it shouldn't be like that.
No,
it shouldn't be like that.
And some people argue that's why.
Yes, we certainly seem to be having some technical problems today. That's for sure. Seems to be in Craig's studio. There's some problems there, because most people may not know, but we're separated by more than half a world. Craig's in the Dominican Republic, and I'm here, Gold Coast, Australia. So we're separated by a lot of space, and sometimes we have difficulties in cyberspace as well, and that seems to be what's going on at the moment. Okay, yeah, he's probably come on again in a moment. Well, just while we're waiting for Craig to come back online, of course, I've been a radio announcer. I've spent 11 years in that role. I don't like dead air. They call that dead air in the business, and even a split second of dead air can seem like a very, very long time. We were talking a little bit about prayer when we're going through a tough time as leaders. And there have been some occasions when I've actually said to people, you know what, now it is actually time to stop complaining to God and just thank God for who he is. Just tell God how much you adore him. So, I remember a number of cases where I've actually said, look, it's now time for you to shift your focus in prayer a little bit and simply say, God, I adore you. I love you, Lord, because that can actually change your emotional state as well, because it causes you to be a little bit outward looking. When the going gets tough, we tend to become inwardly focused and focused on ourselves. And when we pray in a slightly different way and focus on telling God how much we love him, how much we adore him, we hallow him, we honor him, and we desire our lives to bring him glory, to encourage the saints around us, and ultimately, of course, to bring people into the kingdom of God. If we can focus on that, that will sometimes change the way we feel. But all of us are going to go through pretty tough times. That will happen in our business. They could happen in our family. And the one thing Jesus never promised us, he didn't promise us that we wouldn't be persecuted, either by people around us or by the devil, through things like sickness and financial struggles and social disruptions, all of those kinds of things. So, there you have it. So prayer is vitally important. And as I said a little bit earlier in response to a question from Craig, don't leave prayer until you're in a crisis. Don't leave Bible reading until you're in a crisis. Make prayer and Bible reading something which is part of your routine that you do every day. And I've been doing that for a long, long time. I've been writing what I call my prayer and Bible study diary. And I can go back over that and have a look at how I coped during a period of crisis. I think we have got our connection back. There he is, bold and beautiful.
My apologies. Power out, just which is a regular thing here in the Dominican Republic. We have generators in our buildings, but it takes a while for that to switch over sometimes. However, what I don't know is I've got everything on UPS, so it shouldn't. But I think it was rather than a power outage, I think it was a power spike, and they shut down, unfortunately. So lost those. Yash, is everything okay from your end? Great, awesome. Well, let's keep going then. Where were you at, Dr. Rod? Sorry, before I rudely left.
No problem. I've chatted about prayer. I've chatted about reading the Bible, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're probably done on that topic and ready to move on. Oh, we might have lost Craig again. Well, while we're waiting for Craig, I know that one of the things. So we don't plan all this too far ahead, so it's pretty much live when we go to air. But usually a day before, Craig will send me some ideas, the sorts of things we're going to talk about. And we did want to spend a little bit of time in terms of leadership lessons from the book of Luke to talk about the crucifixion, because of course we're coming right up to Easter. We're in the middle of that preparation week before Easter. Good Friday, of course, is coming up on the 7th of April, and Easter Sunday on the 9th. And it is a good time for us to be reflecting on the crucifixion of Jesus. We were talking a little bit earlier about the preeminence of politics in relation to the arrest of Donald Trump. And Jesus, of course, he was crucified for political reasons. The religious leaders of his day, the chief priests, the elders, the scribes, and of course the high priest, and those who had been in that position previous to Caiaphas being appointed by the Romans, who'd made all the appointments of the high priests, they decided that Jesus was a threat to their establishment and made up their minds that they were going to get rid of him. It was pretty hard to get rid of him, actually, because the religious leaders only had authority to execute people for certain infringements of temple customs and temple laws. They weren't able to crucify people at all. That was something that only the Romans could do, and they could only execute people under very, very limited circumstances. So they had to find some way of being able to accuse Jesus of insurrection. And that was really what they were trying to do. It was a pretty difficult thing for them to prove. Also, of course, they had to do everything pretty much in secret because they were frightened of the crowd. You see, the ordinary Jew was pretty much on the side of Jesus. And we saw the evidence of that on the first Palm Sunday as people welcomed Jesus as he rode a donkey into Jerusalem. They cried out, "Hosanna, Lord, save us." So they recognized him as Messiah. That was very inconvenient for the religious leaders because the message that he was preaching and had preached consistently since his first public appearance about 3 years prior was a message that would actually undermine their economic position. The religious leaders were very, very wealthy, and they made their wealth largely off the back of ordinary Jews. So they had to do this in secret because they knew that the ordinary Jews would rise up against them. He was arrested in the night, of course, which is why somebody had to point him out to the soldiers who were probably temple guards. And Judas, of course, performed that role for them. And they paid him 30 pieces of silver, which was the price of a slave, or if you like, the price of a life back then. He first went to Annas, who was father-in-law of the current high priest, Caiaphas. Annas himself had been a high priest, and he questioned Jesus, but really Jesus didn't answer the questions that were put to him. And so Annas could find nothing to accuse him of and sent him to Caiaphas. Caiaphas more or less eventually pushed Jesus into declaring that he was the Son of God. That was an issue, of course, because claiming to be a Son of God was no crime, but claiming to be the Son of God was tantamount to saying, I am the Messiah, which greatly offended the ruling religious class. It's interesting that 2 witnesses were eventually found to testify against him. It's very interesting that their accusation was that he had said, I will tear down the temple and build it up again in 3 days. They actually misquoted him because he never made any claims that he would tear down the temple. He said, if you tear down this temple, I will rebuild it in 3 days. And of course, we understand now that he was referring to himself, but he certainly never said, I will tear down the temple. He was misquoted by 2 witnesses who were obviously not reliable at all. The Sanhedrin, of course, roughly equivalent of the British House of Lords, not elected, they're all appointed. They heard, and they ended up declaring that he was a blasphemer because of the claim that he made about being the Son of God. They turned him over to the Roman authorities, but the interesting thing was the Roman authorities couldn't execute anybody who blasphemed the Jewish God. And of course, Pilate could find no crime that he had committed, sent him to Herod. Herod himself could find no crime. He goes back to Pilate, and Pilate continually insisted that he could find no fault in Jesus, but ultimately he gave in and had Jesus crucified because of the crowd, which was most likely a renter crowd from people who didn't even live in Jerusalem, so they probably weren't aware of the ministry of Jesus. This renter crowd cried out for the life of Barabbas, and of course we now know that Jesus ended up being crucified. You know, he was never ever pronounced guilty of a crime against the Romans, and yet he was crucified in the same way as an insurrectionist. And Barabbas, as far as we know, was actually an insurrectionist. So there you have it. He was essentially crucified for political reasons, and it wasn't really political in terms of his opposition to the Romans. It was political in terms of the kingdom that he was announcing, which was a kingdom that didn't suit the powerful and wealthy religious elite. And I think Craig's back now and he's ready to go with Luke chapter 23, verse 26.
I am, but before we get on to that, though, I did want to, have you actually gotten on to talk about Easter United, Dr. Rod?
No, we haven't done that at this point.
I would like to talk about that. Let's hope it doesn't. There's something that's really wanting to stop us from talking about these topics today. There was a couple of other stories, but we can leave them for another time. But this is one that obviously I want to talk about because you obviously Easter, you were kind of sharing the lead up to the Easter story there, Dr. Rod. But talking about standing united as leaders, and this is something that I think is beautiful, and I think that is a good example that I think that we should be able to, I would hope to see it happen across the world. And that is on the Gold Coast, where Dr. Rod currently lives and is a pastor there. I used to live there, and my heart is there. I spend a lot of my adult life on the Gold Coast. And a number of years ago, 5 years ago, would it be, Dr. Rod, that Easter United started? Would that be right?
This is our
Roughly?
6th. Yeah, we
Six,
were
yeah.
we were knocked about by COVID, of course.
Great. So Easter United was actually, like, we're absolutely blessed to have a mayor of the Gold Coast, Tom Tate, who is overtly Christian, very, very big on his Christian beliefs. He has, a number of pastors around him that he always, involves in the things. One thing he did, he started up this initiative of Easter United, and which is a big Easter event. Now, you probably think, yeah, they have big Easter events everywhere. Yes, but this is actually, it was pretty much funded by the local council and spearheaded by the mayor. But what was beautiful about this is it wasn't one church that put on this event. This was, the point of it was Easter United, a celebration. Obviously, Easter is our Super Bowl, Dr. Rod. As Christians, it really is our Super Bowl weekend. And what's beautiful is all the churches meet at their normal time, Sunday morning, do their normal Sunday service, Resurrection Sunday services and stuff like that. And then in the afternoon, they all gather together, thousands of people. Actually, I want to see in the report how many, if they mention how many they're expecting. No, they don't mention how many they're expecting. Can't remember the numbers from previous years, but I know it's in its thousands that they get. Dr. Rod, how many? Do you know that number at all?
No, look, I can't reel off those numbers off the top of my head, and I suppose in a way numbers are not that important.
No, but I think for me it's the emphasis of the fact that it's the way that they run the event. It's not put on by one church. There's multiple churches from multiple denominations that contribute to the service, and it really is this celebration of Easter United, of the body of Christ coming together in a city, united over what is an amazing and awesome weekend. Dr. Rod, obviously you're on the Gold Coast, you're involved in everything that's happening there. I wanted to talk about this because this is really the power when you see leaders actually stand united and be a part of something that is for a greater cause rather than themselves. Dr. Rod, you're part of the organization, all those sorts of things. Like what have you got to share about this? I kind of wanted to highlight it, but maybe some lessons we could learn as leaders as well.
Sure, and you mentioned at the outset how blessed we are on the Gold Coast to have considerable support from council. Although Easter United is not a council initiative, not a mayor's initiative, it is something that's grown up through the churches. And obviously, look, a city mayor really can't inaugurate something like this. And look, they're not in a sense in the right mountain to do that anyway. Yeah. But they certainly can identify the community value in something like this and support it. And we have been blessed indeed that council, I understand, by a unanimous vote, has made some money available, because they get a fair bit of it back in fees and so on. And that's perfectly fine. But the main point, though, is that it is supported by churches from across the denominational spectrum. Yep. So, I think it has never worried me that there are multiple denominations. That's not a concern for me.
I agree.
And I say to people, look, you go and find a local church, the one that's the right fit for you and for your family. And sometimes that'll be one of the churches that belongs to the mainline denominations. Sometimes it might be an evangelical church. Sometimes it might be a Pentecostal church. And even within each of the denominations, every local congregation has its own little flavor and its own little culture. That is a good thing. We don't, there's no such thing as a one size fits all. In Christendom. What draws us together, of course, among other things, is the Easter story, the Christmas story, and the Easter story, they're really central to the Christian faith. Not all that much else matters in terms of whether or not we should unite together. We can have
Yep.
all kinds of theological discussions, arguments even, but we are united by our celebration of Easter. The fact that God in human flesh made the decision to sacrifice himself for the whole of humanity. That's one of the things we celebrate. And the other thing we celebrate is his bodily resurrection, one of the best attested facts in human history, even though it actually defies science, the science as we understand it. You know, science would say when you die, you don't get up again. But miracles are really about a suspension of the scientific or the natural norms. And there are many arguments that support the idea that the resurrection really did take place. So that's central to the shared faith that we have as Christians right across the denominations. But see, this is not about us trying to assert a particular theological position. This is about the churches agreeing that there is something to celebrate, that there is something to celebrate publicly, and that there is a message for all of those who want to attend, whether or not they're Christians. And the message, the theme that has been declared over Easter United this year is that there is hope for tomorrow.
That's
and
great.
You see, the great message of the gospel is a message of hope and encouragement. There is hope for humanity. Many of the things that we discuss on our podcast might lead people to conclude there's no hope for humanity. But there is. The hope is in Jesus Christ. And although we perhaps take much for granted today, one of the hopes that was introduced by the early followers of Jesus Christ is that every human life is valuable. So you know what? It doesn't matter what your particular worldview is, what worldview you adopt, even what lifestyle you adopt. One of the central elements of Christianity is this idea that every human life matters. And yes, we can argue about when does life start, when does it end, and most classical or historical Christians would say from conception until the last breath is naturally drawn. And, you know, we can argue about that, but it's very difficult to argue against the idea that every human life matters. So I think most human beings are going to agree on that. And Jesus has brought so much hope along those lines into our world. And it was that idea that you know ultimately drove things like the abolition of slavery, the development of the Plymouthal line on ships. That's an interesting story as well that happened roughly parallel with the abolition of slavery as well. The way in which technology has been developed and adopted, a lot of that has Christian roots. So there's much that we can celebrate. And I think the other good thing about Easter United is it actually gets us out of the buildings, because so many people associate Christianity and other religions actually with the building. And so there's some kind of club that meets inside the building. And, you know, the outsiders are never certain, what have I got to do if I want to join this club? Or maybe they hear bits and pieces about what goes on in that club and decide, well, I don't want to be part of it. But this is actually showcasing the church when we're outside those the four walls of the building. So
and in a very, very, very beautiful part of the world as well.
Oh, it is. And today's actually the bump-in day. The bump-in starts, so they're building the stage and so on. A beautiful day here at the Gold Coast. There was, I think there was rain forecast at the beginning of the week, and we've been praying, Lord, we need sunshine, even if it's only sunshine over that part of the Gold Coast. But it has been
just in this
splendid
circle.
day today.
Yeah,
it's a splendid day today. And look, that can happen too. I had a testimony for one of the business guys in my own church who he needed fine weather for a certain job, and literally there was rain all around.
Wow.
Where that job was happening, it didn't rain on the job.
I believe it.
You know, that's our God. And that's the kind of God we want to share with people through events like Easter Fest.
So
Easter United. Easter United. I keep making that mistake.
That's a different one.
Because Easter Fest was something else I was involved in.
Does this still run?
A few years ago. No, it's not. There's a different type of Easter Fest running up in Toowoomba. See, I've had the privilege of living 16 years in Toowoomba, and then I've been here now for 14 years on the Gold Coast, and I've been witness to.
So you're only 30 years old,
unity.
Dr. Rod.
Yeah, sure.
You've spent 16 in Toowoomba. Yep, great. You're really wise for 30 years old.
But it's been such a wonderful privilege to experience unity of the brothers and sisters in Christ in both these wonderful cities here in Queensland, and you know, to see particularly how well the church has served community. When I say church, I'm talking about the churches of the city, how well they've served their community over a long period of time. And in Toowoomba, Easter Fest was one, if you like, manifestation of that unity. Here on the Gold Coast, Easter United is a manifestation of that unity. And much of the heart behind it is we want to bless our communities. We want to do in our community what no other human institution is able to achieve. So we're not saying we're here to replace the good things that governments do.
No.
We're not here to replace the good things that businesses do. We're actually here to do something that no other institution can do. God created the church for good works of certain kinds, and that's what we do.
That's really good. And so I really want to just, moving into Easter, it's a big celebration time. Everyone's looking for something to do. Like Easter United, I think, is a great example of leaders standing united, and leaders from government and the church and business all standing united as well. I think that it's a good example of that. And so I really wanted to highlight, because I'm really proud of my home city, the Gold Coast. I do miss the Gold Coast. And you'd say, that's unusual. You're living on a tropical island. Yeah, I still miss the Gold Coast. But if you're in Brisbane or Gold Coast or anywhere surrounding there and looking for something to do on Sunday afternoon, Sunday the 9th of April, it's at the Broadwater Parklands, just across from Australia Fair there. I used to actually live overlooking that park. I miss my apartment there. It's right on the Broadwater, and so you got the beautiful grass parklands and overlooking the water there as well. It's absolutely gorgeous there. So check it out. Food trucks and entertainment from 2 p.m. and the Easter actual celebration event starts from 5 p.m. So check out Juice FM. They've got the information on the website, or actually I'll put all the links below of all the stuff.
Yeah, there's a Facebook page for Easter United as well. There'll be lots of information there.
easterunited.com.au, I think it is. I'll put all the links below. Go and check it out. I'll actually post this earlier than what it's meant to, so that you guys can get notified of this. It's a great event, and it's a great way to see people united, and it's actually a great event to. If there's some people in your life that you're wanting to invite along to Easter, but kind of uncomfortable about inviting them along to church per se, invite them along to the Parklands. There's a concert in the park. It's a great celebration. They'll have a blast. So that's my encouragement. And our prayers go out to everyone involved, making sure that it is an incredible event. Talking about Easter, talking about Easter, let's get on to our last topic of leadership lessons from Luke, which I know that while I was having my power outs here, my multiple power outs, Dr. Rod took over and kind of led into talking about that. I actually want to do leadership lessons from Luke slightly differently today, because I want to read about the crucifixion, which is what Easter is about. Actually, no, it's not. Easter's about the resurrection. Let's be honest. But leading into it is obviously the crucifixion of Christ, the sacrifice of Christ, and obviously there's so many leadership lessons from Luke. But actually reading through this passage, I actually couldn't pick, because normally we'll pick like one kind of key verse or part of it, and like that'll be our lesson from it. But reading through this, there was almost every single line had a leadership lesson in it. And I really felt like I'm going to maybe kind of preach from it a little bit. I mean, I want to read through the whole thing, but I'm just going to stop and say, here's a lesson for us. Stop. Here's a lesson for us. And Dr. Rod's going to jump in and interrupt me as well if he's got something to say as well for each of these points. But I'm just going to read through this. I'll try to do it as quickly as we can. But I think it's important. It's really important as we learn to become united, as leaders standing united. Look at how we're able to stand united through the crucifixion. As they led him away, Jesus away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it to behind Jesus. It was funny that earlier we were talking about followership, Dr. Rodden, that you were talking about, like, what's it to be a 2IC? Sometimes when we're leading, we actually do have to carry the burden of those around us. And the beautiful thing that I see from here is he was just available. He was there. He was available. And I think that's part of a key of being a leader, is just being there and available. And sometimes, yes, we have to carry the burden. And I'm sure he didn't think it at the time, but now looking back, what an honor to be able to carry that, that burden for Christ. Dr. Rod, I'm gonna look up to you, because I'm sure you've got something to add for each bit. So I'll just look up to you when I'm, wait for you to share.
Well, poor old Joseph, he didn't have much choice in the matter, did he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When he was ordered, because obviously Jesus was far too weak. He'd been scourged. He was, and you see, he'd actually also been, how should I say, gravely assaulted when he was appearing before Caiaphas, the high priest, I should say, and the Sanhedrin. So he was scourged under Roman law, he was very badly beaten by the religious leaders. So that's something to keep in mind. He
hadn't slept the night before either.
Well, no, of course not. So he was physically incapable of actually carrying that cross. But Joseph, he was ordered to, and Simon, I'm sorry.
Yes.
I called him Joseph twice, I think, but Simon was ordered by the Romans to carry that cross. He really didn't have much say in the matter. And look, sometimes as leaders, we don't have a lot of say in the matter.
Yeah, that's good.
And we just have to recognize that from time to time, and know when is the right time, as it were, to pick our fights and to say, no, this obviously wasn't one of those times.
That's really good, Dr. Rod. Thank you. Now, verse 27, a large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. I think for me, this speaks to, obviously, we talk about being leaders. There's fruit in being a leader, and that fruit is obviously, I say this, and I don't even know where this comes from, but if you're a leader and no one's following you, you're just going for a walk. Like if you're a leader, there should be people, like there should be a crowd that follows you. And I think what's beautiful about this is there's women who mourned and wailed for him. Like, do you have that much of a positive impact on those people around you that they will mourn you if you leave? They will mourn you if you're going through a trial. We talk about Trump earlier on. How many people are actually mourning and wailing for him? I don't know that there are that many, but I think that's a key. That's kind of like the fruit of leadership is the impact that you actually leave on those people around you. Dr. Rod?
Yes, I was sort of hoping you'd go on to the next verse, actually, because that's when Jesus said, don't weep for me, don't mourn for me.
Mm-hmm.
And
so let me read that one.
Yeah.
Jesus turns and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and your children. For the time will come when you'll say, blessed are the barren women and wombs, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us.
Yeah, so he was actually prophesying about the fall of Jerusalem, which happened in AD 70, a bit under 40 years after he was crucified. So, he's saying, listen, stop worrying about me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's unimaginable, of course, what he was facing. But even under that strain, the duress of the crucifixion, and he knew well what was coming, he still said, you're more important than I am.
Yeah, that's so good. And that's what I got from it is even in his deepest trials, he wasn't woe me. He wasn't, oh yeah, can you just do this for me? Or can you no, he was selfless, completely selfless of like, please don't cry for me. You don't know the pain that's actually going to come for you. You there will be this time when you wish that you didn't have kids because of what they are going to experience, that really selflessness.
See, one thing, Jesus had already resolved the issue about his own pain and suffering. He did that in Gethsemane.
Yeah, that's good.
And
purpose. We're talking about purpose.
He was scared. We've got to remember, it's pretty hard to get our heads around all of this, I guess, philosophically. But we've got to remember Jesus was God.
Yep.
But when God appeared among human beings as a human being, the Bible says he laid aside his deity. It doesn't mean he gave it up. So it doesn't mean he wasn't God for 33 years or whatever, but he laid it aside. In other words, he chose, not because, as he said on his arrest, I could have called all these angels in. We could have wiped out all the opposition in the earth then and there, but he chose not to do that. And there are theological reasons why that was the case. But you see, as a man, he was terrified about what he was going to face. And that's when he prayed, Father, if there is any way, can you take this cup from me? And he said, well, not my will, but yours be done. So he went through a period of absolute terror. That's why he sweated drops of blood. That can all be explained.
Which is actually it was a medical condition.
It's rare, but it can be explained on the basis of deep, like petrifying fear. So he'd been through that, you see. He'd resolved his issue before he experienced the women lamenting.
That's really good. He dealt with it in private, and he dealt with it. So
that was why he was able to get the focus off himself and onto somebody else. So it wasn't that he was never afraid. He was petrified of what he was going to go through, and he prayed about it. And that wonderful, beautiful prayer of consecration where he says, well, Lord, and it wasn't as if God's will was some kind of capricious thing, because of course there are over 200 prophecies in the Old Testament and so on. And look, it would take us hours to unpack all of this, but my point is that as a human being, he had dealt with the issue, what about me? He'd dealt with that already, and that was what empowered him under great duress to say, don't weep for me. And he was able to minister to those people, although they wouldn't have understood what he meant at the time.
No, but we can learn from it from afar. Verse 31, for if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? Understanding that, I think that the wisdom there is that we can draw from that kind of like just statement in and of itself is just a way of understanding that people do act differently in different scenarios. People, when things are going great, people behave a certain way, and then when things aren't going so great, people don't. And so I think it really reveals our character, and we should be really tested and aware of that. Dr. Rod, anything about that?
Nothing to add specifically on that verse, no.
Two other men, verse 32, two other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him along with the criminals, one on his left and the other on his right. I think for me, out of this is just what's a leadership lesson is sometimes we're talking about standing united, and sometimes we can find ourselves in, let's say, in the company of people that don't represent us, right? That we can, and just he was there with criminals, and he was being called a criminal, and we as leaders can sometimes, people can lump us in, maybe not physically, but theoretically they can lump us in with people. I know I've been accused of, oh, you're just like so-and-so person, or you're just like those other people, or whatever. I think that we need to be able to stand firm in those situations as leaders, that we will have those accusations thrown at us. We will be lumped in with people that don't represent who we are, but they are, but that's the perception. And so we need to make sure, even though we are lumped in with those people, we still stand out. The saying of be in the world but not of the world, right? God's called us to be in the world, not of the world. And this is him. He's being treated like a criminal. He's in the presence of criminals, and he's still able to not be pulled down to being a criminal.
Yeah, and I think the other point to make too is that things happen that level us.
Oh, that's really good.
Jesus was crucified as a criminal. As I said a little earlier, that it was never actually proven that he was a criminal, but he was treated as if he was an insurrectionist, that he'd broken Roman law. And I just thinking, one of the things that levels us actually is mental illness. There are now dozens, if not hundreds, of stories, testimonies of elite sports people, very senior people in business as well, who have had struggles with depression, for example, drug addiction, and other illnesses and so on. That's one of the things that levels us.
Mm.
And you know, we don't want to trivialize the crucifixion of Jesus at
No.
all, but it is just worth reflecting that,
Yeah.
you know, Jesus was someone who had been accepted by the ordinary people in Jerusalem as the Messiah, the
Mm.
Son of God. And yet
Mm.
he was brought down to the same level as these criminals. They wouldn't have been petty criminals. These would have been people who were actually, probably they'd committed crimes of insurrection,
Yeah.
murder, those kinds of things, which were punishable by death,
Yep.
by the Romans. And insurrection, incidentally, was punishable by basically instant execution by crucifixion.
Mm. Okay. Verse 34, Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Although that's not how it's written in here, but it's always how I don't know. I always know it, for they know not what they do. And they divided up his clothes by casting lots. Actually, I'm going to split that a little bit. Just that first bit of, like, going back to that earlier when we're talking about Jesus, spoke about them as, like, was more caring about them, right? Like the women that are weeping is like, don't cry for me. This is once again, he's being wronged, like greatly wronged. And we've spoken about that tonight. It's as leaders, like, there is a leader that is seemingly being wronged right now, and coming out and just going, forgive them, forgive them. We will be wronged as leaders. We can't take it personally. We can't take revenge. We can't, as we mentioned about before, about there's certain psalms that call down curses on our enemies. We need to forgive, like that. That's ultimately the message, isn't it? Of Easter is forgiveness. We are forgiven, and I think that's we teach forgiveness in our leadership program. Yes, free leadership development program, faith-based leadership development, link down in the description. Check it out. That week 2, we talk about that because it's so important that we understand and we receive forgiveness, because we can't be a leader carrying unforgiveness. And this is just Jesus just representing that from the start of, like, you know what? We need to forgive these people. And he knew what his purpose was there. It was ultimately forgiveness of all of our sins.
I think it's also worth considering the second half of that statement, for they
Yes.
know not what they do. And of course, in the context of his crucifixion, the Roman soldiers, for example, who actually carried out the crucifixion, they wouldn't have known. You see, because Jesus wasn't known to Pilate. Pilate didn't know who he was. That's how ignorant the Romans were about Jesus. So on that level, of course, the soldiers who were directly involved in his crucifixion, they didn't know what they were doing. But I suspect also the religious leaders didn't. They didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. They didn't believe that.
Yep.
They did believe that he was an uneducated, like, country bumpkin, basically, who was nevertheless charismatic and had undeniably carried out a lot of miracles. But they didn't know the truth about Jesus. I'm quite convinced of that. And they were so blinded, of course, by their own, that they'd been basically infiltrated, if you like, by the Babylonian spirit. And for them, their religious leadership was primarily about power and wealth. So they were totally deceived, and they were overtaken by, if you like, the spirit of Babylon, which I think is really ironic when it was happening in the temple in Jerusalem. So in that sense also, they did not know what it was they were doing. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind in our own contemporary times, when we're surrounded by attitudes, behaviours that are just absolutely contrary to what we hold dear as Christians.
Yep.
And others have said we're in the West, we're living in both a post and pre-Christian world, a post-Christian world, in the sense that the older generations have tasted Christianity and rejected it, and the younger generations, by and large, have never heard about it. So they're pre-Christian. In that sense, when they persecute us, they don't know what they do. And I've had this experience. They honestly cannot figure out where we come from.
Yeah.
Because our whole worldview is just so utterly foreign to them.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we do need to forgive, but we also need to understand that they're motivated in a sense by true ignorance. They don't know what it is they're doing. They really do not understand that they are persecuting children of God, people who have been adopted into God's family. They don't understand that that's what they're doing, and they don't understand the consequences.
Yeah,
I feel like understand.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really good point of like, when I teach about forgiveness, one of the keys is empathy. And Jesus is really showing that empathy is like they just don't know what they do. Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. And I think that if we could, we kind of do have that view when we're looking at, I mean, you look at the gender identity politics and all those crazy things that are happening especially in the United States right now, of like the Democrats versus Republicans, and there's all this craziness. We're all going like the world, like we do tend to judge other people, let's say just view other people and analyze what they're doing from the viewpoint that they have the same understanding and the same beliefs as we do, and they just don't. And I think that's actually a very good point. Like they just don't know. They genuinely believe that they're doing the right thing. And like you say, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the religious elite, they genuinely thought that they were doing the right thing by stopping this. So, yeah. The part B of that verse is, and they divided up his clothes by casting lots. I think it's kind of interesting that even though they were crucifying this person, they saw such value in his possessions, and they were blinded by the things, and it's very easy for us as leaders to be caught up in the showing off of things, the right cars, the right clothes, the right, things like that. Are you casting lots for the purpose or for someone's clothes? Like that's kind of what I see from that. I'll move on. Verse 35. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. They said, "He saved others, let him save himself. If he is Christ, if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." The soldiers also came up. I'm just it's kind of like the same point. So I'll keep going. The soldiers also came up and mocked him, and they offered him wine and vinegar and said, "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." And there was written a notice above him which read, "This is the King of the Jews." I think it's funny that we as leaders might be stepping out and doing what we're called to, and other people, they will just mock us. They will talk down to us. They will talk against us. And especially if you're doing something for God, you will have people that will just be sneering against you. And that's just going to be part of your journey. God never promised that Christianity was going to be easy. God never said your calling, if you follow your calling, everything will be beautiful. And that's what that's kind of like the difference between, this personal development movement and actually true Christianity is you need to follow your calling. Yes, you'll find peace. Yes, you'll find fulfillment. Yes, you'll find purpose, but it'll be difficult. and you have opposition and you have trials. He promised us that, unfortunately. And actually, Dr. Rod, I heard someone recently put like that this is the King of the Jews. Apparently that was put up by Pilate. Is that correct?
It was the Romans doing. I don't know. I'd have to check. I don't know whether Pilate necessarily directly ordered that, because that wasn't a Roman crime. That wasn't a crime to claim to be the King of the Jews. And by the way, there were lots of people, self-proclaimed prophets who made all kinds of claims about themselves. It didn't really bother the Romans because they weren't breaking any Roman law. It was just an issue for the religious leaders. And it's quite interesting that his crime was to claim to be the King of the Jews, because that, as my understanding, that wasn't a crime in Russian law, in Roman law. That wasn't a crime.
Dr. Rod.
I think I've been talking too long and the old brain's slowing down a bit. But yeah, that wasn't it wasn't a crime. See, Pilate couldn't pin anything on him, and to Pilate's credit, he tried his darndest not to crucify, but you see, almost certainly what he was weighing up was, well, look, you know what? If I don't do this, there's going to be a riot, and I'm going to get into trouble, because his job was to stop any kind of unrest.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why I say that the sort of proximate reason for Jesus' crucifixion was purely political, right?
So
God had a much bigger reason for it, but
than government,
political.
Yeah.
So I just
I heard recently that a pastor actually shared an incredible one, and I can't remember where it was, but they said that there's suspicion that was Pilate that put it up, and I actually then when I was reading this, I was like, I've always been taught that sign was there to mock Jesus. I wonder whether, because we know that Pilate was kind of torn with this, because he's like, we know that, maybe Pilate had a bit of a revelation, and he's like, I'm going to put this sign up because I actually genuinely believe this guy is the King of the Jews and the Son of God. Like, I wonder whether he had a revelation and he was like, you know what, like in his conversation with Jesus, he saw something or whatever, and maybe he had a revelation. He's like, no, I'm going to put a sign up that actually says this is.
Look, as far as I know, there's no extra biblical evidence to suggest that Pilate sort of became, well, he wouldn't become a Christian, but if he did put the sign up, most likely he was actually sending a message to the religious leaders that this guy's innocent, because it wasn't a crime to claim to be King of the Jews under Roman law.
Yeah.
He didn't break any Roman law.
Yeah.
Right? He was crucified innocent. In a way, he had to be to fulfill Scripture. So if it is true that Pilate actually ordered that sign be written and erected, and it may well have been, I doubt very much that it happened because he somehow got converted or anything like that.
No, I don't necessarily mean that. I just wonder whether he had some sort of revelation. I mean, there's something different about this guy, and
look, that might have been the case, but I don't think he would have had time to even form that conclusion, because he knew nothing about Jesus. Jesus wasn't before him for very long, and my guess is he was much more worried about the possibility of riots, and he was listening to the noise of the crowd. If he did it, my guess is the statement that he was making was that this guy did not break Roman law. Remember, basically, Pilate washed his hands. He said, I wash my hands of this. I'm not responsible for this. So he never found Jesus guilty. He merely tried to cover his own butt because he was concerned that there was going to be a riot.
That's good. That's good. So let's keep going. Like we said, this was going to be a bit of a long one because there's a lot in this, but we just really wanted to just draw out so much stuff from here. Verse 39, one of the other criminals who hung there hurled insults at him. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself. I think it's kind of interesting that the guy is up on a cross in the same punishment as you and sitting there mocking as well. But I'll continue. But the other criminal on the other side of him rebuked him. Don't you fear God? He said, since you are under the same sentence, we are punished justly for we are getting what our deeds deserve. But this man has done nothing wrong. I think that's going back to our verse or our kind of theme of today of like standing united, and kind of sometimes we have to stand up for things that are unjust, and some people are going to be insulting and mocking and speaking badly about some people around us, some leaders that we are with. We need to stand firm. Even this guy was a criminal and he was wrong. He was hanging on a cross as well, but even from there he was able to defend Christ because he saw the unjust mockery, the unfair assaults that Jesus was getting, and even from his position, he was able to stand united with Jesus. And as we know, as the story goes on, then he said to Jesus, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answered him, I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. And I think that's a beautiful picture of standing united in the face of challenges and everything like that, both from Jesus and from the criminal, that Jesus was able to still stand united with this person who actually called out to him. He may have done things wrong, and we as leaders may have people around us that have done things wrong, but they will stand up. If they stand up for you and they're standing united, like we need to be united with them, but not. The person still died. The criminal still paid his consequences. He still had consequences. It's not about negating consequences, but we can still stand united with people. Dr. Rod?
I don't know that I've got too much more to add there. Both of the people who were crucified with Jesus were criminals, and there's no debate about that. One recognized Jesus for who he was, and the other didn't. And like one of the things you'll find in life is that some people will recognize you for what God has assigned you to, for the gifts that he's given to you, and others won't.
Yeah.
And, again, I don't want to trivialize the crucifixion, and because it's such a solemn commemoration for us around Easter time. But, praise God, we're not going to actually literally be nailed to a cross either. But I think it is an observation that we can make, is that people don't always recognize the assignment that God has given us, and they don't recognize the gifts, the talents that God has given us. Some will stand with us, and some will stand against us.
That's good. That's good. Look, the theme of today is stand united. Stand united. Leaders stand united through trials. We need to be standing with those going through trials, stand united. But if we are going through trials, we need to make sure we're not standing alone, make sure we have people standing with us. And as Dr. Rod shared earlier, some of the key principles, like find that key principle that we can stand united for, even though we may not agree with some things that are happening. Find that principle and stand united on that. There's been so much great things that we've spoken about today, but Easter, like this is an amazing weekend. Look, I encourage you, remember what Christ has done. He stood united with us. He actually came down onto this earth, onto this planet, and stood literally united with us so that we can have a relationship with him, so that we can be forgiven, that it's not, we don't have to live by any laws to try to tick boxes, to try to fit the bill, to get it all right, to get in heaven. Because trust me, we wouldn't. If there was a checklist, no matter how good we think we are, we literally cannot live up to the standard. So that's why Jesus came down and said, I'm going to stand united with you guys. And now he is actually standing united with us, but in heaven, standing representing us. And as we communicate to God, God sees Christ and his righteousness and not ours, because Jesus is standing united with us. And so I want to encourage you, bless your Easter. I pray that for all the ministry leaders out there, I pray that your church services are overfilled. If you're on the Gold Coast or Brisbane or in that surrounding area, check out Easter United, links below. Not sponsored, anything like that. It's just I really believe in that event. And but if not, find your local Easter event. Find something that you can get connected with. Dr. Rod, thank you very much for hanging with us and sharing your wisdom and taking over with those power outages as well.
As always, it's great to be with you, Craig, and I look forward to doing it again in a week's time.
Awesome. Yes, we will. And we'll love to hear reports of how Easter have gone and some great stories of Easter around the world. Bless you. Hey, if you've enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below and share what your thoughts are on any of our topics that we've shared. And if we'd be honored if you consider subscribing to our channel if you want to watch more of our leadership content as well. So as we look at everyday events, whether it be politics, entertainment, pop culture, or in ministry or in business, and from the Bible, leadership lessons for us to become better leaders. Bless you and have a spectacular Easter. See you next week.